Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the infiltration of the education sector, and this includes, even kindergartens, primary schools, high schools, universities, colleges, and so on, and even the private sort of education sector where folks come into the company to tell all the white employees how evil and racist they are, and they're all Nazis. Now, even that. But I'm looking at overall, particularly advanced education, but not confined to that. Now, I was looking at an article where it's claimed that in some universities in the United States or the Western world generally, they're talking more the Anglosphere here, but in many universities, the ratio of leftists, in which they include sort of far left radicals, to leftists, to even centre right or centrist people, is around 15 to 1. So 15 sort of angry leftist educators or alleged educators to every one. Now, the folks in, say, the engineering or mathematics disciplines are overwhelmingly listed as conservative, and I think they'd be apolitical or centrist. So anyone who does not hold radical leftist views is dismissed as being, Hitler. And so we're looking at the ratio in reality from activist leftist to just apolitical centrist. That the ratio could be 20 to 1, if not higher. Now, it wasn't always so in the, say, if you go back and if you do a bit of digging on the internet, in the 1950s, in Britain and the United States, there were 1.7, 1.8, depending on, say, 2 to 1, give or take, 2 to 1 conservatives to leftists. Now, the left definition of a leftist then was quite soft. These would have been, soft socialists, I suppose, in the day, rather than the radical leftist positions that we see now. Looking at radical leftists and then looking at those who would spread social disruption so there can be a communist takeover, I guess we need to separate that from one from the other there. But let's have a look at this generally. Now, so say it was 2 to 1, so in the 1950s, around, say, mid-1950s. So we're talking about the era of McCarthyism in the United States. The Cold War, some very genuine concerns about communism spreading around the world, the brutality of Mao in the Cultural Revolution, the Nikita Khrushchev admitting to the sins of Joseph Stalin and the mass murders that went on during the Stalin regime, and so on, with numbering in tens of millions, of course, or possibly pushing many times that in China in the Cultural Revolution, mass murder just probably didn't agree with you, for goodness sakes. So when we look at those times when there was genuine and very substantial fear in the Cold War about communists being everywhere, the ratio is about 2 to 1, conservatives to soft socialists. I don't think many people would want to have been seen as a radical communist at the time, and those that did would have, I think, been rather cautious about who they told. But it took a mere 10 to 15 years later, and now we're talking the Vietnam War and civil rights movement in the United States, and already the mass arrival of Mexicans into the United States and these sorts of things. Marxist agitators all over the place, funded by the Soviet Union. A lot of communist type journals. There was mass publishing of radical feminist Marxist propaganda during these times. In 1968 was when you see a case for feminist, communist, Marxist revolution by Shulamith Firestein. You're looking at the explosion of the works of, Jewish, communist, lesbian, or bisexual, lesbian activists, Betty Friedan, Kate Muller, Eisenstein. I mean, the list went on, and all these works are getting published and put about. So it was an era of huge change, and it became fashionable very quickly to be a communist and to say, hey, guess what? I've been to Russia to get training on how to foment Marxist revolution and so on. So this was a time of huge change. Now, during that time, very quickly, the ratio of Marxist attitude academics or school teachers, they weren't so much getting into kindergarten at this point or primary elementary school. This was more sort of, year 9 high school through to year 12. That was more the area. But the teachers certainly teaching history and senior high school were very much starting to talk about the Marxist, the oppression and capitalism and racism and this sort of stuff. This was entering the lexicon very quickly during this time. And I was amazed at how quickly, or anyone looking at this be amazed at how quickly the ratio of teachers and educators generally changed from being more conservative to more the leftist Marxist teachers started to outnumber the conservatives very quickly. I mean, it happened surprisingly quickly. Already there now, by 1970, they're at 2-1 in favour of Marxists. So in that short space of time. Now, this doesn't just happen with a snap of the fingers. Maybe some of these educators were closet Marxist all along, and then now are feeling it was safe to come out and declare, that could have happened. But the infiltration of teachers' unions and academia by Soviet agitators, communist agitators, and so on, the trade unions, all across the board, and introduction of courses like political economy and political science, which were really introductions to radical activist Marxism. They were all over the place, and they were increasing sociology. That was again a Marxist course to introduce Marxism. The civil rights, again, very heavily laden with Marxist agitators. Marxist agitators were all over the black rights movement and so on, and using again the basic formula of, well, look, outcomes are different, and if outcomes are different, it must be because of oppression, and if it's oppression, then we have to tear the whole thing down and start again. And the Marxists very much had this view that when we're in control, it's going to be year zero. We begin from year zero, and this was very much a view that these many of these teachers and academics had. Now, going back to, and I'm not ancient, but I'm going to turn 62 in a few months, so going back to my sort of early school, I remember there were, in primary school, that is, between the ages of 5 and 11 years old, and I went to quite a few different schools, but there were, as in the folks moved around a bit, thinking back, there was some obvious lesbians, and thinking back, there were some they kept their activism to themselves to a large extent. A few things you'd get I remember the music teacher was a lesbian, very much so. I mean, when I look back, unmistakably so, and she, when we had the sort of end of year musical concert, she insisted that there had to be an equal number of boys and girls. Now, this meant that the boys who were in the majority of being the much better musicians and whatever, that she was putting capable boys to one side and simply to get the gender outcome that she wanted. those were early signs of active. And as a kid, I thought, even as a young kid, like say, I'm 8 years old or something, I would say, well, gee, that guy is very good on the piano, or that guy plays the clarinet very well. That boy, why is he not in this? Why have you got people in there who are quite ordinary? And then her methods of dumbing things down, so she would get very simple. For example, the triangle. You'd have the little metal bar and you'd ding along the triangle. She would, in order to get the equal outcome, she would dumb down the requirement. So the boy that played the piano quite well was cut out, and then she would put a girl in to do the triangle, a very simple instrument, and one that you couldn't really fuck it up. So these were these were the manifestations of equity and equality, and that she was pushing. Now there were other teachers there who at this particular school who also were obvious. I look back now. The obvious leftists in the way they wanted to do things. And if you were a white boy from a stable family, you were much more accountable for your behaviour than say someone who was maybe a bit swarthier or something like that. So there were already there were things there, and the teaching of history. There were views that were put forward there that were clearly part of the overall sort of Marxist view of history. Now, they were done gently, and they weren't pushed, or there was no savage denunciations or these sorts of things, but they were put forward. So there was already a lower level of infiltration during that time, and it was already obvious and evident then. Now, by high school, it was much clearer that there were, not that I thought about it at the time, I saw it as a form of accidental malpractice or ineptitude or incompetence. I perceived it wrongly. Like the music teacher, for example, in primary school, I thought maybe she just didn't appreciate the boy's piano playing, and that's why she did what she did, and it was an accidental outcome of ineptitude rather than an ideological position on something. And I didn't see that as a kid. I couldn't perceive why ideology should override sensible behaviour. It wasn't something I easily, still don't actually. So by the time high school came along, then again this idea of when the high school teachers were much more and the teachers' unions by that stage were quite bolshy and quite angry and activist and calling for all sorts of ridiculous social engineering. And one of the things that in high school they were talking about was getting equal outcomes between boys and girls. They said, look, the outcomes aren't equal between boys and girls. That's because boys are better students. And they would say, well, the outcomes are equal, so it must be because of the oppression of the girls. The girls are being oppressed. That's why the outcomes are not equal. Now, the idea that outcomes should be exactly equal is in itself a travesty of common sense. But that doesn't deter radical activist ideologues. And so they started to find ways of stacking the deck. They would artificially lower the standard the girls had to meet. So for a girl to come, be the top student in the form rather than get the best mark in the exam, they would just simply lower the standard. So the girl who got 50% in the test, would be awarded 75% in the overall mark. A girl who got 60% in the test would be given 90% marks, ensuring they would come first. So the boy that got 85%, he would come third. That's even though he beat the girl in the exam by 25 points, who cares? We're out for social equity. So those things were already creeping in on certain subjects. They would sort of do it on things where there was no direct way of grading it. For example, an essay. Who is to say that the essay should get 10 out of 10 or 5 out of 10 or 0 out of 10? So very subjective type assessments rather than objective. And so they steered, so objectivity in mathematics, for example, or science, there's a degree of objectivity you can't really escape from. Whereas in things like I don't know, poetry or essay writing or something, literary comprehension, you can just say, well, no, it's definitely worth 10 over 10 now. When in reality, when you put two essays side by side, you wouldn't give that. So anyway, this is looking at how it was creeping in when I was at high school. Well, I wouldn't have sort of actually picked up on it at high school, but it was there, and I noticed. Well, what are you doing? Why are you doing these things? Surely, strictly pass or fail is the best way. Merit is the best way to determine. And if somebody wants to do better in the exam, then they work harder. They hit the books and so on. Now, I did sort of think there should be allowances for people who came from very difficult circumstances. I always then believed there should be after school, after class coaching for such people, so they could have access to more tuition if they needed it. And so I was in favour of that. Even as a kid, I was in favour of scholarships for people who came from poor circumstances. If they were bright and they were doing well at exams, then they should get scholarships, was my view. But it was something I still hold today, certainly. But nonetheless, the teachers were coming in, and the teachers' unions, and it must have been with the tacit approval of the government. Why was there no oversight to stop it? Why were so many leftist viewing teachers, Marxist teachers, teachers with Marxist views, why were they firstly drawn to teaching and the revolutionary possibilities of controlling young minds? But why were they hired? Why were they allowed to do it? Why are they coming out of teachers' college with leftist views? Why are they coming out of teachers' college thinking that merit-based exams were discriminatory against minorities? Why are they already coming into the profession with that? And the same goes for universities. Now, at the time, certainly as I was heading into university, there was the beginning of in Australia, beginning of the explosion of sociology type courses and peace studies, these sorts of things. They were starting to appear in bigger numbers, and the bar for passing, getting into university, a very small number of people only ever made it into university. These were at least in terms of passing exams, the brightest people. And it's very difficult. It's possible, but it's very difficult to get to people, to get to bright people. And now, if someone's a straight white male, they're not lesbian, or they're not gay, or they're not black, or so, they don't come from a supposed oppressed class, or the ability to perceive themselves as oppressed, and so on, then people are much harder to infiltrate their heads with radical ideology. It can be done, but only with a small number. And so in order to get a captive audience for radicalization, you have to lower the bar, and that's done in two ways. You firstly create a whole lot of sociology courses where it's completely subjective, and then you create African American studies, lesbian studies, gender studies, lesbian dance theory, that sort of, you do all that. But then also, in order to fill up these courses, to have enough students, you have to lower the bar for admission to university. Now, admission to university, certainly when I was doing the high school, graduation exam to university, I was doing that, the bar was very high. And there was no way you could get into those courses without, the meaningful courses, without getting a very good pass mark. Even getting 70% in the graduation exam was considered to be pretty ordinary. Well, so what? You had to be in the 80%, the 85% before you were really a serious player. I didn't get 85%. I wasn't in that league. This is for like medicine and that sort of stuff. So getting into university itself was a tough gig back then. Only a very small number. The kids that stayed at high school, 3% would make it to university, and of those, close to half of those would drop out. They couldn't cut it, not for financial reasons. They just couldn't cut it. The rigors of having to pass exams was such that they just couldn't do it. And it's quite brutal. If you flunked your exams at the end of the first year at university, you had to appear before a committee to show cause why you didn't pass. You've got a position here at university. Why is you not working hard enough, or you're too busy partying, or you're just too stupid, or why did you not pass? Now, unless you could say, hey, my mother died yesterday, you needed a seriously good excuse, they would tell you, well, leave. Don't stay at university. You're not up to it. You can't hack the pace. But all that disappeared. So there became a lot of very low, in the interest of equity, became a lot of very low IQ kids came in vast numbers. And those vast numbers of kids required lots of specialist, nobody fails courses to be invented, African American music studies or something. And then those courses required a vast number of academics and teachers and so on. And so, and then a whole new wave of low IQ activist academics were waved in. So it's hardly surprising ultimately that it went down this path. Now, identifying that it is so is one thing, but unwinding it is another. Why would you want low IQ minority kids in university? Kids that would have flunked out of junior high school, kids that wouldn't even have made it to year 10 in high school. These kids say, hey, look, you need to go off and do something. Create courses at the community college for them. Something like 6-month diplomas, or do something like that. That's fine. But universities must and should, as they were originally intended, to be institutions of higher learning for the best and the brightest kids, as in sorted out by meritorious exams. And therefore the teachers must be dedicated to, should be done, employed by and for, committed to the highest levels of excellence in learning and education. And that is their only mission. Outside of that, they do not have a mission. Now, the late 1960s idea of we're fighting a Vietnam War, we're fighting against the forces of, we're fighting for social change, we're fighting for social justice, we're fighting for civil rights. The people with that mentality go and be an activist in your own time and on your own money, but don't do it on the taxpayer's dime, just so you can radicalize another group of low IQ kids. They wouldn't be able to do it if they didn't have so many low IQ kids to radicalize, but they do, and which is why equity and social justice has been an all-round failure in education terms and in societal terms. Have they created activists through this? Well, sure. But what the fuck use are these people to anybody? You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.